On the morning of November 24, 1944, Dr. Kenji Yamamoto stood in the courtyard of the Nakajima Aircraft Company's Metallurgical Research Facility in Ota, staring at an object that would change everything he believed about his nation's chances in this conflict. The massive four-bladed propeller, recovered from a downed American bomber near Tokyo just 3 days earlier, gleamed in the pale autumn sunlight. It measured over 5 meters in diameter and weighed nearly 400 kilograms, yet what struck Yamamoto most was not its size, but its impossible perfection. Every surface was smooth, every edge precise, every blade identical to its neighbor, in ways that Japanese manufacturing could not replicate. He had been told that American industry was weakening, that their resources were stretched thin across 2 oceans, that victory was merely a matter of Japanese spirit, overcoming Western decadence. Standing before this propeller, Yamamoto realized with growing dread that he had been lied to. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Yamamoto and his team would discover in the following weeks would shatter not only their professional assumptions, but their fundamental understanding of the conflict itself. This single propeller would reveal a truth so overwhelming that it would transform dedicated researchers into reluctant prophets of their nation's inevitable defeat. Men who understood with scientific certainty what their military leaders refused to accept. Dr. Kenji Yamamoto had spent 15 years studying metallurgy, first at Tokyo Imperial University and then at research facilities across Japan. At 42 years old, he was considered one of the finest metallurgical minds in the country, responsible for developing several alloy compositions used in Japanese aircraft engines. His team at Nakajima included 12 specialists, each an expert in their particular field. There was Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the crystallography expert whose keen eyes could read the history of metal like others read books. Engineer Masao Fujita specialized in stress analysis and had designed testing equipment used throughout Japanese industry. Young researcher Yuki Sato, just 26, possessed an almost intuitive understanding of aluminum alloys that had already earned him recognition from military authorities. These men had examined captured American equipment before. They had studied fragments of fighters downed over the Pacific, analyzed engine components recovered from crash sites, and tested armor plating from vehicles captured in the Philippines. Each time, they had found American materials to be good, sometimes very good, but never beyond Japanese capability to understand and eventually replicate. They approached the B-29 propeller with the same professional confidence. The B-29 superfortress had appeared over Japan for the first time just weeks earlier, and its arrival had caused considerable concern among military planners. The aircraft flew at altitudes exceeding 9,000 meters, beyond the effective ceiling of most Japanese interceptors. It carried a payload of bombs that dwarfed anything previously dropped on Japanese soil. Most troublingly, it seemed almost impervious to the anti-aircraft defenses that had proven effective against other American aircraft. Understanding how the Americans had achieved this technological leap became a priority, and the propeller represented the first significant component recovered intact. Yamamoto organized his analysis systematically. The first phase would involve external examination, measuring every dimension and documenting every feature. The second phase would require sectioning the propeller to examine its internal structure. The third phase would involve chemical analysis to determine the exact composition of the alloys used. The fourth and final phase would attempt to replicate the American manufacturing processes using Japanese materials and methods. The external examination began on November 25th and immediately produced the first surprise. Engineer Fujita, using precision instruments calibrated to measure variations as small as 1/100th of a millimeter, found that all 4 blades were identical in weight to within 3 grams. The pitch angle of each blade matched the others to within 6/100ths of a degree. The surface finish showed no tool marks, no grinding patterns, no evidence of the hand finishing that characterized Japanese propeller production. It was as if the blades had been grown rather than manufactured. Fujita called Yamamoto over to examine his measurements. He had checked them 3 times, he said, because he could not believe the results. Japanese propellers, even the finest examples produced for their most advanced aircraft, showed blade-to-blade weight variations of 15 to 20 grams. Pitch angle variations of a quarter degree were considered acceptable. The American tolerances were not merely better than Japanese standards, they represented a different philosophy of manufacturing entirely. Dr. Tanaka began the crystallographic examination on November 27th. He cut a small sample from the blade root, polished it to a mirror finish, and etched it with acid to reveal the grain structure. What he saw through his microscope made him sit back in his chair and remove his glasses to rub his eyes. The grain structure was perfectly uniform throughout the sample. There were no inclusions, no voids, no evidence of the segregation that occurred when alloys cooled at different rates in different sections of a casting. The metal appeared to have solidified instantaneously and uniformly throughout its entire mass. Tanaka had studied aluminum alloys for 2 decades. He had examined samples from every major aircraft manufacturer in Japan, from laboratories in Germany, from captured British and American equipment. He had never seen anything like this. He called Yamamoto and the others to look through the microscope, and they stood in silence, passing the eyepiece from one to another, each struggling to understand what they were seeing. The chemical analysis, conducted over the following week, revealed the alloy composition. The propeller was made primarily of aluminum, alloyed with copper, magnesium, manganese, and small amounts of other elements. The proportions were similar to alloys used in Japanese aircraft, but the purity of the base materials was extraordinary. The aluminum contained less than 0.05% iron contamination compared to 0.3% in the best Japanese aluminum. The copper was similarly pure. These might seem like small differences, but Yamamoto knew that impurities at these levels could reduce an alloy's strength by 10 to 15% and its fatigue resistance by even more. Young Sato conducted the mechanical testing. He cut standardized specimens from various locations in the propeller and subjected them to tensile tests, hardness tests, and fatigue tests. The results confirmed what the microstructure had suggested. The American alloy was stronger than comparable Japanese materials by approximately 12%. Its fatigue resistance, the ability to withstand repeated stress cycles without cracking, was nearly 20% higher. Most significantly, these properties were uniform throughout the propeller. Japanese components typically showed considerable variation in strength from one location to another, reflecting inconsistencies in casting and heat treatment. Yamamoto compiled the results and prepared a preliminary report for his superiors. He stated the facts plainly, without editorial comment, but the implications were clear. The Americans had achieved a level of metallurgical sophistication that Japan could not match. They had done so not through some secret formula or exotic material, but through superior control of conventional processes. They had better raw materials, better manufacturing equipment, and better quality control systems. The report went up the chain of command to the Army Air Technical Department. Within a week, Yamamoto received new orders. He was to expand his analysis and prepare a comprehensive assessment of American manufacturing capabilities as revealed by this single component. He was given additional resources, including access to intelligence reports and captured documents. He was also given a warning: his findings would be classified at the highest level. He was not to discuss them with anyone outside his immediate team. Yamamoto spent the next month deepening his investigation. He obtained intelligence reports on American aluminum production and learned that the United States was producing over 900,000 metric tons of aluminum per year, compared to Japan's 110,000 tons. American aluminum came from massive smelters powered by hydroelectric dams that generated more electricity than Japan's entire national grid. The bauxite ore came from mines in Arkansas and South America, transported by fleets of cargo ships that crossed oceans as casually as Japanese trucks crossed city streets. He learned about the American propeller industry and discovered that Hamilton Standard, the manufacturer of the captured propeller, operated factories that employed over 15,000 workers and produced more than 500 propellers per day. Japan's entire propeller industry, combining all manufacturers, produced perhaps 150 per day, and many of those failed quality inspections and had to be reworked or scrapped. He learned about American machine tools and found that the United States possessed more than 1 million precision machine tools capable of working to tolerances of 0.02 of a millimeter, compared to Japan's inventory of approximately 150,000 such machines, many of which were worn and poorly maintained. The Americans had developed automated production lines where machines performed sequences of operations without human intervention, maintaining perfect consistency hour after hour, day after day. The information accumulated on Yamamoto's desk, like evidence in a trial, each document adding to an indictment of Japanese industrial capability. He began to understand that the propeller's perfection was not an anomaly, but a standard. That American factories produced such components by the thousands that every B-29 flying over Japan carried 4 of these impossible propellers and dozens of other components manufactured to similar standards. Engineer Fujita made a calculation that haunted Yamamoto. Based on the production rates they had discovered, the Americans were manufacturing enough propellers every month to equip more than 3,000 new aircraft. Japan was producing perhaps 300 aircraft per month, and that number was falling as raw materials became scarcer and factories came under attack. By this single metric, American industrial output exceeded Japanese by 10 to 1. Dr. Tanaka pursued a different line of investigation. He obtained samples of Japanese propellers from the same period and subjected them to the same analyses he had performed on the American component. The comparison was devastating. Japanese propellers showed blade-to-blade weight variations averaging 18 grams. Their alloys contained 3 to 5 times as many impurities. Their grain structures revealed voids and inclusions throughout. Their mechanical properties varied by as much as 15% from one location to another. They were, in every measurable way, inferior to the American product. Tanaka went further. He calculated what these differences meant in practical terms. The weight variations caused vibration that fatigued engine mounts and airframe structures. The impurities reduced strength, requiring thicker, heavier blades to achieve the same performance. The inconsistent properties meant that some blades would fail while others remained sound, making failures unpredictable and maintenance difficult. A Japanese aircraft carried a handicap in every component, attacks of extra weight and reduced reliability that compounded across thousands of parts. Young Sato made perhaps the most disturbing discovery. He attempted to replicate the American propeller's surface finish using the best equipment available at Nakajima. After 2 weeks of effort, consulting with the company's most experienced machinists and surface treatment specialists, he concluded that it could not be done. The Americans had developed polishing and coating techniques that Japan simply did not possess. The smoothness of the blade surfaces reduced aerodynamic drag, improved efficiency, and increased the effective power of the engines. Japanese propellers, with their rougher surfaces, wasted perhaps 3 to 4% of engine power in turbulence. Across an entire aircraft, such losses might amount to 50 or 60 horsepower, equivalent to carrying several hundred kilograms of useless weight. Yamamoto compiled these findings into a second report, submitted in late December. This report went beyond technical analysis to address strategic implications. He wrote that Japan faced an opponent whose industrial capabilities exceeded Japanese capabilities by an order of magnitude. American superiority was not limited to one area, but extended across the entire spectrum of manufacturing, from raw materials extraction to final assembly. This superiority was growing, not shrinking, as American production expanded and Japanese production contracted under the pressure of resource shortages and bombing. He concluded with a statement that required considerable courage. Based on his analysis, he wrote, "Japan could not win a war of production against the United States. Every month that the conflict continued increased American advantage and decreased Japanese capability. The only rational course was to seek a negotiated settlement before Japanese industry collapsed entirely." The report went up the chain of command and disappeared. Yamamoto received no response, no acknowledgement, no feedback of any kind. He continued his work, analyzing other captured components, training his team, contributing to Japanese aviation development as best he could. But he knew now that his work was futile, that no amount of Japanese ingenuity could overcome the industrial gulf between the two nations. In January 1945, the B-29 raids intensified. The aircraft that had seemed so mysterious just weeks earlier now appeared in formations of hundreds, darkening the sky over Japanese cities. They dropped incendiary bombs that created firestorms, destroying entire urban areas in single nights. Yamamoto watched the raids from the roof of his laboratory in Ota, saw the glow of distant fires, felt the ground shake with explosions. He thought about the propellers carrying those aircraft, 400 perfect blades turning in unison, products of a manufacturing system that Japan could neither match nor stop. The Nakajima factory at Ota became a target in February. Yamamoto and his team had moved most of their equipment to a dispersed facility in the countryside, but the main factory was hit repeatedly. Production fell by more than 60%. Critical machine tools were destroyed. Skilled workers were killed or injured. The propeller production line that Yamamoto had studied was buried under rubble. Through all of this, Yamamoto continued his analyses. He examined captured components from B-29 engines, finding the same impossible precision he had seen in the propellers. He studied fragments of airframe structure and discovered aluminum alloys even more advanced than those used in the propellers, alloys that Japan had never produced and could not produce with available equipment. Each analysis confirmed and extended his earlier conclusions, adding detail to a picture that needed no more detail, piling evidence onto a case that was already proved beyond any doubt. In March, Dr. Tanaka came to Yamamoto with a request. He wanted to write a technical paper on the crystallographic analysis of the American propeller, to share their findings with the broader Japanese scientific community. Perhaps, he suggested, other researchers could find solutions that had eluded their team. Perhaps Japanese industry could learn from the American example and improve its own processes. Yamamoto understood Tanaka's motivation. The man was a scientist, trained to share knowledge, to build on the work of others, to contribute to the collective understanding of his field. But Yamamoto also understood the reality of their situation. Their findings were classified. Any publication would be censored or suppressed, and even if the information could be shared, it would make no difference. Japanese industry lacked the resources, the equipment, and the time to implement the improvements that would be necessary. The conflict would be decided long before any such changes could take effect. He explained this to Tanaka as gently as he could, watching the hope fade from his colleagues' eyes. They were scientists caught in a disaster that science could measure but not prevent, men who could see clearly the approaching catastrophe but could do nothing to stop it. In April, Yamamoto received orders to report to a meeting in Tokyo. He traveled by train through a landscape of devastation, passing through cities that had been reduced to ashes, seeing refugees streaming along roads, observing the complete breakdown of the transportation system he had once taken for granted. The train was delayed repeatedly, rerouted around damaged tracks, stopped for air raid warnings. A journey that once took 2 hours took nearly 12. The meeting was held in a government building that had somehow survived the bombing. Yamamoto found himself in a room with perhaps 20 other technical specialists, metallurgists and engineers and scientists from various military and industrial organizations. A colonel from the Army Air Technical Department addressed them, explaining that they had been assembled to discuss Japan's technical position and to recommend improvements that might be implemented in the remaining months of the conflict. Yamamoto listened as his colleagues presented their analyses. Each had studied some aspect of American equipment and reached conclusions similar to his own. One specialist had examined American aviation fuel and found it to be 30% more powerful than Japanese fuel, providing better performance from equivalent engines. Another had studied American radio equipment and found it to be lighter, more reliable, and more sophisticated than anything Japan produced. A third had analyzed American fire control systems and discovered computational mechanisms that Japan could not replicate. The presentations continued through the morning and into the afternoon. Each speaker added another element to the picture of American industrial superiority. Each confirmed that the gap was not closing but widening. Each implied, without stating directly, that the conflict could not be won. When Yamamoto's turn came, he presented his findings on the propeller. He described the precision of the manufacturing, the purity of the materials, the uniformity of the properties. He showed photographs of the grain structure, graphs of the mechanical test results, tables comparing American and Japanese specifications. He concluded with his assessment that American manufacturing capabilities exceeded Japanese capabilities by approximately 10 to 1 in most areas, and by even more in critical technologies. The room was silent when he finished. The colonel who had organized the meeting thanked him for his presentation and moved to the next speaker. There was no discussion, no questions, no debate. The information was received and set aside. One more unwelcome truth in a collection of unwelcome truths. The meeting ended without conclusions or recommendations. The specialists returned to their organizations to continue their work, to analyze more captured equipment, to document more evidence of a disparity that everyone acknowledged but no one would address. Yamamoto rode the train back to Ota through another night of raids, watching the fires from his window, counting the formations of B-29s passing overhead. In May, Germany surrendered, and Japan stood alone against the combined power of the United States and its allies. The bombing intensified further. Cities that had already been destroyed were bombed again to prevent recovery. Industries that had been dispersed were hunted down in their rural hiding places. The Japanese military spoke of a final decisive battle that would turn the tide, of secret weapons that would sweep the Americans from the sky, of the unconquerable spirit of the Japanese people that would overcome any material disadvantage. Yamamoto knew these claims were fantasies. He had measured the disadvantage in his laboratory, calculated it with his instruments, documented it in reports that no one wanted to read. The spirit of the Japanese people could not close the gap in aluminum production. Courage could not compensate for impurities in alloys. Determination could not produce machine tools that Japan did not possess. Engineer Fujita suffered a breakdown in June. The stress of the bombing, the hopelessness of their work, the certain knowledge of approaching defeat became too much for him to bear. He stopped coming to the laboratory, stopped eating, stopped speaking. His family found him sitting in his garden, staring at nothing, unresponsive to their calls. He was taken to a hospital where doctors could do little for him. The collapse of a nation was not a condition they knew how to treat. Dr. Tanaka died in July, caught in a raid while traveling to a meeting. His train was strafed by American fighters, and he was among the casualties. Yamamoto learned of his death 3 days later, when a colleague mentioned it in passing. There was no funeral, no memorial, no acknowledgement of the loss of one of Japan's finest crystallographers. The machinery of death had grown too large for individual deaths to matter. Young Sato was drafted in late July, pulled from his laboratory work to join a military unit preparing for the expected American invasion. He came to Yamamoto before he left, bowed deeply, thanked him for his guidance and teaching. Yamamoto watched him go and knew he would not return, that his talent for understanding aluminum alloys would be wasted in a hopeless defense of beaches and hills. Yamamoto was alone in his laboratory when the announcement came in August, the Emperor's voice on the radio speaking of bearing the unbearable and enduring the unendurable. He sat at his desk among the instruments and reports, surrounded by the evidence he had accumulated over 9 months, the measurements and analyses that had told him what the Emperor was now telling the nation. The conflict was over. Japan had been defeated by an opponent whose industrial capabilities it could not match, whose production it could not interrupt, whose quality it could not equal. In the weeks that followed, Yamamoto was summoned to meetings with American occupation officials. They wanted to understand Japanese technical capabilities, to learn what Japan had known about American equipment, to assess what technologies might be transferred or developed. Yamamoto answered their questions honestly, showed them his reports, explained his findings. The Americans were polite and professional, treating him as a colleague rather than a defeated enemy. One American officer, a metallurgist named Colonel Harrison, who had worked for Alcoa before the conflict, examined Yamamoto's analysis of the propeller with particular interest. He confirmed Yamamoto's findings, explained the processes that had produced the exceptional quality, described the factories and equipment that Japan had lacked. He spoke without arrogance or condescension, one professional to another, sharing technical knowledge as scientists do. Harrison made a comment that stayed with Yamamoto for the rest of his life. The Americans, he said, had not won because they were braver or smarter or more determined than the Japanese. They had won because they had more aluminum, more machine tools, more electricity, more of everything that modern conflicts required. Industrial capacity had become the decisive factor in such conflicts, more important than strategy or tactics or the courage of individual soldiers. A nation that could not produce could not prevail, regardless of how hard its people were willing to fight. Yamamoto thought about this as he rebuilt his career in the post-war years. He worked for Japanese industry as it recovered and then flourished, applying the lessons he had learned to peacetime production. He helped develop alloys for automobiles and aircraft and electronics, contributed to the quality revolution that made Japanese manufacturing famous worldwide. He lived to see Japanese products exceed American products in precision and reliability, a reversal that would have seemed impossible in 1945. But he never forgot the propeller. He kept his original report in his personal files, along with photographs of the grain structure and graphs of the test results. He looked at them occasionally, reminding himself of what he had learned in that laboratory in Ota, of the truth he had discovered in the impossible perfection of those 4 blades. American industry had not merely been larger than Japanese industry, it had been more sophisticated, more controlled, more capable of producing quality at scale. Quantity and quality had both favored the Americans, leaving Japan with no advantage that could compensate. The propeller itself disappeared during the occupation, presumably taken by American forces, along with other captured equipment. Yamamoto sometimes wondered where it ended up, whether it sat in a warehouse or museum, whether anyone who saw it understood what it represented. It was just a propeller, a mechanical component designed to convert engine power into thrust, one of thousands produced every month by American factories. Yet it had taught him more than any textbook or lecture, had shown him truths that changed his understanding of the conflict, of industry, of the relationship between technical capability and national power. He gave lectures in his later years, speaking to students and engineers about quality control and manufacturing precision. He told them about the propeller, about the measurements that revealed American superiority, about the reports that went unread and the warnings that went unheeded. He wanted them to understand that technical excellence was not a luxury, but a necessity, that the details mattered, that impurities measured in hundredths of a percent could determine the fate of nations. Most of his audience heard these lectures as practical advice for their careers, guidance on how to improve their products and their companies. A few understood the deeper message, the lesson Yamamoto had learned in his laboratory as the bombs fell around him. The gap between nations was not measured only in soldiers and weapons, but in machine tools and kilowatt-hours, and parts per million of impurities. The nation that mastered production mastered the future. The nation that neglected quality invited defeat. Dr. Kenji Yamamoto passed away in 1987 at the age of 85. He had lived to see Japan become an industrial powerhouse, to see Japanese automobiles and electronics and machinery compete successfully with the best in the world. He had contributed to that success, had trained students who led companies and research institutes, had helped establish the standards and practices that define Japanese manufacturing excellence. His family found his old reports when they cleared his office, yellowed pages covered with measurements and calculations and conclusions that had once been classified at the highest level. They did not know what to do with them, these relics of a vanished era, evidence of a conflict that most Japanese preferred not to discuss. Eventually, they donated the papers to a university archive, where researchers could study them as historical documents. The propeller that started it all was never found. Perhaps it was melted down and recycled, its aluminum atoms dispersed into new products, its 4 perfect blades reduced to their constituent elements. Perhaps it sits in a storage facility somewhere, uncatalogued and forgotten, waiting for someone to discover it and wonder at its precision. Either way, its lesson endures. The truth it taught to one metallurgist in one laboratory, in one terrible year of the 20th century. Industrial capability determines national capability. Quality cannot be separated from quantity. The details matter. The measurements tell the truth. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Do not forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.